Hey guys, welcome to part 13b of the survival series tutorials. Now this is going to be a continuation from the last one that we made, and we were creating or instantiating a bear trap, or a trap that we could use to trap animals. Now I said in this video what we're going to do is be able to control the randomization of possibly being able to catch an animal, and then once we catch the animal or do whatever, we can then collect it and add the whatever it is to the inventory. So say we catch the animal and it adds 10 food to the inventory, that's what it's going to do, and then it's going to get rid of the object accordingly. It's going to swap out the objects depending on if you catch something or if your trap is destroyed. Say there's a chance that you could catch something, or there's a chance that the animal could get away and your trap could be just useless. So let's get started really. There's going to be one script and a couple more assets to import today. Now with the I made a crafting folder and I used the miscellaneous folder to add some stuff. Now this time I'm going to add a right click and I'm going to import a new asset, and I'm going to import bear trap broken FBX, and you can see it there. I've just made a quick mock up of the model to show that it's broken. You can obviously change these if you don't like it, or use a model so it's more independent. Then we're going to import the bear trap caught, and this is just going to signify that, oh look, we've got something within the trap. Obviously you can have your own animal models, anything like that. For the sake of visual and the sake of ease for these tutorials, I've just given you this, and you can get these off my website. So now we've imported those, what we want to check is the previous bear trap. We scaled it up to 0.03, or for whatever you need for your scene. What I'm going to do is scale the other two up to 0.03 as well. And once we've done that, what we want to do is open up the prefabs folder, or wherever you've got the trap prefab. Now we're going to do a few things to this in itself. What I'll do is we'll bring this in, and we'll just bring it into the scene so we can see it now. Right, now it's got a collider on. Now this collider is going to be used as our trigger, so if we've caught something, we're going to be able to walk into the trigger and then it'll add to the inventory. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make the, if you can see, the box collider, bring it up a little bit, and we're going to scale it down almost to the bottom, so that's big enough for our player to walk into. Now from there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go game object create other cube, or however you're going to want to create a cube. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put it at the very base of the trap itself, and what I'll do is I'll scale it up and then I'll scale it back down so we make a thin little box, and it's going to act as our collider so it doesn't fall through the floor. It can be pretty thin, and we'll just place it underneath our object, and if we need to we can just scale it out so it encapsulates the whole thing. So that'll be fine. We can get rid of the mesh renderer, so now you can just see it underneath our object. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this trap collider, and what we're going to do is we're going to parent trap collider to the trap prefab. So that's there, that's all well and good, and you can see on the trap prefab we can still see the big collider that we're going to need. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to bring in the broken trap, and what I'm going to do is we could select the trap prefab and set the position to 0, 0, 0 if we were starting this afresh, and we'd be able to get them all exactly perfect. But I'm just going to select the entire object and just roughly place it where the other one is, so we don't get any particular problems there. That one's here, and then the caught one is roughly, that will do. Now what I'll do is I'll add both of these, parent those to the trap prefab again, and then what I'm going to do is on the trap prefab on the hierarchy, I'm going to click apply at the top. So up at the top corner here, hit apply, and you'll notice that if I close my miscellaneous folder, I go to trap prefab now, you'll notice that it'll have updated within my project. So now we've got the trap collider, we've got the two objects that we may or may not want for now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that the two FBXs that I imported, I'm going to untick them so they're not visible. And then we'll hit apply again on the main prefab. Hit apply, and then you can see in your project panel, you can see that they are unticked and they're not active at the minute. So first of all, we'll go to our scripts folder in the crafting, and we're going to write a new script folder. Right click, create new JavaScript, and we'll call this trap controller. And now we'll open that up in MonoDevelop, and we're going to start writing the script which is going to control what the trap needs to do. And now I'll explain it as we go along. So I'll delete the two starting functions, and then below here what we'll say is variable timer as float equal to 30.0 with a semicolon. Now you can change this in the inspector if you need to, so you can change it to whatever time you might want it to be. You might want to wait 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 seconds, but we can change that later on. We're going to have a variable, or we might have a private variable called countdown, type boolean equal to true. Now with these variables, we could have them all to just get rid of the public at the beginning, and then we can be able to see them in the inspector if we need to change them. But for this, we'll keep that like that. We'll have a variable called player, have that as type game object, a variable called caught model as type game object, variable broken model as type game object also with a semicolon. Now we're going to start writing the things that we need for our array, and an array is something that we can give a list of objects to, or a list of values, and then I'm going to want to strategically say to it, out of these values I've given you, I want you to find a random one based on whatever we've added. So we've got a variable called choices, and have that as type integer, then 2 square brackets to indicate the array, and then inside that we'll say equals, then another 2 square brackets, we'll say 1, 2. Then we'll add a semicolon. So what this means is that in the choices array that we're going to create, we're going to have a choice of 1 or 2. 1's going to signify that we've caught something, 2's going to signify that we haven't. And you could obviously add more if you really wanted, so 3 could mean you've caught a bear, 4 could mean you've caught a rabbit, 5 could mean you've caught something else. But they're really up to you to go with whatever you're trying to create. Now we're going to have a variable called result, and have that also as type integer with a semicolon. Then we're going to have a variable called has chosen as type boolean equal to false, and then a variable has caught type boolean equal to false again. Okay, so we'll start writing everything that we need to write. So I'm going to start by writing function start, 2 brackets, then 2 curly brackets below. I'm going to say player equals game object dot find, open brackets, in quotes, first person controller, close that up and add a semicolon. And then that's okay for now, so that's just going to set our variable here to find the first person controller. Now this is a little bit of slow scripting, so if you wanted to, you could add this yourself in the inspector later on, like we've done further down in the tutorials. Then we're going to write function update, 2 brackets, 2 curly brackets below, and then we're going to say that if countdown, close that up. So what this is doing, it's saying if this private variable countdown, if true, which it is, then we're going to say timer minus equals time dot delta time. So what this means is the timer will count down according to the delta time, or the frame rate that we've got in our game rate. Then what we want to say is if timer is less than or equal to 0, and we'll say exclamation mark, has chosen, add the bracket afterwards, then 2 curly brackets below, and we'll create a new function called choose number, 2 brackets and a semicolon. Then we'll say countdown equals false with a semicolon. So what we're doing here is we're going to count down until we reach a specific value, and then here we'll say that if the timer reaches 0 and it has to be 0 and has chosen is equal to false, like it is now, because if it's anything else that we need it to be, it will make sure that we can't run down anymore. We'll choose a number, and then we'll say that countdown is equal to false. So if countdown is then equal to false, so if countdown there is equal to false, it will not count down anymore because we don't want it to. We want it to stop once it's reached 0. Then what we're going to do is that under here, under the update function, we're going to create another function called choose number, like we set up there, 2 brackets, 2 curly brackets below. Then we're going to set variable. So this is going to be a variable specific to its own function, so we don't need to worry about declaring it at the top. And we're going to call this variable how many things, and have that as type integer. Set that equal to choices.length with a semicolon. Then we're going to have a couple of line breaks. We're going to say another variable called my random index as integer with a semicolon. Now my random index equals random dot range open bracket 0 comma how many things with a bracket and a semicolon. Then we'll say result equals choices, add 2 square brackets, and in the square bracket we'll write my random index with a semicolon. Then we're going to say that has chosen is equal to true. So I'll explain here. So if the timer equals 0 and we haven't chosen a value yet, we're going to just call the function choose number. Now new number creates a variable called how many things, and it's going to look at the length of choices. So we've got a length of 2 because we've got 2 items that we added here. Now in the index, we're going to create an index, and we're going to look at, or we're going to create a number that chooses a random range, chooses a random value from what you've given. So from 0 to how many things we've got. So we've got 0 to 2, so we've got 2 items in there, and we're going to say the result variable that we've got up here is the choices that we have. So the choices are 1 and 2, and then of how many spaces that we had in our array that we made. So it will either output 1 or it will output 2. Then we're going to say that has chosen is now equal to true. So if has chosen is now equal to true, the update function won't then choose another number, because we only want it to choose one number one time, or it would do it forever and it would mess up the game. Now what we're going to do now is have up here, back in the update function, we'll say that if result is equal to 1 and exclamation mark has caught, close the brackets, 2 curly brackets below, then we'll have another variable called caught animal, 2 brackets and a semicolon. So that's all well and good for that. Then under there we'll say else if result is equal to 2 and exclamation mark has caught, close that up, add 2 curly brackets below, destroy trap with a 2 brackets and a semicolon. So that's all well and good for there. So now we need to create those 2 functions. So we need a function called caught animal, 2 brackets, 2 curly brackets below. And in there what we're going to say is this dot game object dot get component open brackets, mesh renderer dot enabled equals false. So what we're saying here is we're just going to find the game object this script is on, so it's the trap prefab, and we're going to set its mesh renderer, so we can't see its mesh anymore because we're going to want to, you know, use the other mesh that we've added. Then we'll say cart model dot set active in brackets true with a semicolon. So now we want to enable the other object that we've got because we've actually caught something. Then what we want to do is say this dot game object dot get component open brackets, and now this time box collider, and then say dot is trigger is equal to true. Now, because to do a trigger enter, or to collect the items that we need to once it's done, we need to be able to do that. So if we set it to is trigger our collider, we'll be able to walk into it and do something with it. And then what we'll say is, in there we'll say has caught is equal to true. So then if that is the case, it will do the opposite in here. It will check this boolean and see, oh, we've caught something. So now I don't want to do any of these two again, because we don't want to be able to, you know, show and hide loads of objects and stuff, or it'll mess up once again. So like before, we'll have a function called destroy trap, 2 brackets, 2 curly brackets below. Then we'll say this dot game object dot get component, oops, open brackets mesh renderer, close that up, dot enabled equals false, like we did at the top. So we're going to hide the initial trap object. Then we're going to say broken model dot set active is true with a semicolon. Then for this one we're going to say again has caught is equal to true, because this one is not we're not going to activate the collider because we're not going to be able to collect anything. Now there's one last function that we're going to create, and that is the on trigger enter. So we're going to write a function on trigger enter, open brackets call colon collider, close that up, add 2 curly brackets below, and we'll say that if call dot tag, or call dot compare tag actually, in brackets and in quotes player, close those 2 up at the end, then add 2 curly brackets below there, and say that player dot get component open brackets inventory with a capital, as long as that's what your infantry script's called, dot fish, we should really name that to meat or food to make it easier, but dot fish for now, plus and equals 10. Then we'll say this dot get component box collider dot is trigger is equal to false, and then we'll say this dot game object dot set active false. Now I've only added in that top line there just to make sure that it sets it to false straight away before we disable the full object. If we go back to Unity now and go on to our prefabs, and the prefab is called trap prefab, as you know, and we're going to add trap controller to that, and then I'll close up the scripts folder. You can see on there in the game it's updated, as long as we're updated our prefab on the right on the project. Then on the trap prefab, what we're going to do is we're going to add the broken model, so here. Then we're going to add the cart model, and you can see that in our choices array we've got 1 and 2, we've got a size of 2, we've got 1 and 2. The result here that we can show, you can obviously hide these variables by making them private. We have has caught and has chosen. We've got a timer, so if I set this timer to 2 for the sake of this, and I will delete that out of here, I will play my game and we'll pretend that we're playing it properly. Now I'm going to craft myself a trap and I'm going to place it. I'm going to see that after 2 seconds, this time we managed to be able to catch the item, And now if you check my inventory, I've got no fish at the moment. And then what we're going to do is we're going to be able to walk into it. Nothing happened there because my player wasn't tagged player. So select your FPS controller and make sure it's tagged player. For some reason I don't know why that's happened, but we'll test again. I'll need to make sure that we're inside. You'll notice that this time it had got broken, so we can't actually do anything with it. Now this time, if we walk into the object, you'll notice that I've walked into it, it's disappeared, and if we check the inventory, we've got now 10 fish. So all in all, things that you've got to remember for this is we've got the prefab that we started with, we've got the collider underneath it to make sure that it doesn't fall through. We've got one collider on it which we're going to set to is trigger when we need to. We've got 2 other objects that we added to our prefab to make sure that we enable disable to look like, oh, we've caught something or we haven't. Then we've got one script which I will quickly whiz through, that we've got our selection of variables at the top. We find the player depending on its name. We start a countdown as long as we can do that by the boolean. We'll say that if the timer equals 0 and we haven't chosen a number yet, we're going to call the function chooseNumber and set countdown to false, so we can't count down anymore, so it stops where it is. When we go to chooseNumber, we'll set the array length. We'll show that how many items. We've got the choices, which is of 2. We'll find the length of that, which is a value of 2. We've got the index that we're going to find, and we're going to set that a random number between 0 and how many items we've got, which is 2. The result will be between 1 and 2, and then we'll set has chosen equals true. So now that has chosen equals true, we can't choose a number again. So then we'll say that if it's result 1 or if it's result 2. We'll say that is result 1 or is it result 2? Have we caught anything? No, we haven't. We'll either catch an animal or destroy the trap. Then we'll disable the mesh render in both cases, activate the object in both cases if it's one or the other. Then if we've caught an animal, we'll activate the box collider, or the box collider's is trigger component, so then we can walk into it. And if that's the case, we've got this function here which is on trigger enter. If the player enters that, we'll find the inventory script which is on the player and say, oh, add 10 to that. And then we'll set the trigger to false and disable the entire object. Now here you could, in this destroy trap, you could have a yield and wait for 5 seconds, then destroy it, or something like that, but just for visual sake, we're showing that it all works, and it all works nicely. So, realistically, that's just a simple way of adding yourself some new traps and components, or a basic way to justify catching animals and things like that in a base sort of element. So again, thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Cheers.